Hey, welcome to Filler. I'm Joe.
And I'm Steve.
Hopefully, welcome back, and if not, welcome to our show where we talk about media of all kinds and how it fills our cups. This is going to be our third episode, which is exciting. We're going to be talking about a romance movie as the theme for February, which was actually Steve's pick. So, Steve, you want to talk a little bit about the movie?
Yeah, so you came to me and said, let's do a Valentine's theme episode. And I was like, well, I can talk endlessly about 500 Days of Summer. To which you said, fuck that movie. You were like, I used to love it, but I don't anymore. And I was like, okay, don't tell me why. Let's talk about it on the podcast. And so we both rewatched the movie and had our girlfriends watch it with us as well. So we threw in some girlfriend notes, which I think this is a perfect movie for, because it is a surprisingly male-centered movie, I think, for a romance. And I think that's a big part of why it's such an interesting movie to discuss. And I'm really curious to see what conclusions we both come to after rewatching it now in our end of 20s or early 30s, as opposed to what it's really made for, which is like early 20s teenagers, like young men just starting to feel love, you know?
Yeah. I appreciated watching it again versus the few times that I'd watched it in my late teens and early 20s. And I definitely have a different perspective, like you noted. And I also appreciate having the different perspective of our partners, because I definitely watched it with girls I either liked or girls I was going out with when I'd seen it previously.
Mm-hmm.
But they were around the same age as me. And it was a different time, different era, and maybe different ideals and values, which we might dive into a little bit as we talk about the film. So it'll be interesting to see, as society has progressed, how well 500 Days of Summer has aged.
Yeah, that definitely stood out. I'm very excited to get into stuff about that for sure.
I think that's actually a good way to start, just because it begins with that author's note, which I totally forgot about, and immediately I thought it was distasteful. I'm sure at the time I laughed at it and I was like, yeah, I agree. Girls can suck real bad. But I think the third line on the screen was the creator calling, I guess, his ex a bitch.
Yeah.
And it rubbed me the wrong way in 2025.
Yeah. And it does kind of seem to go against what the point of the movie is, but I think it's a good hook when you're entering it, at least the way I did, as a young man dealing with a breakup I couldn't get over at the time. Let me let me get a little personal for a bit about my history with the movie, because, like you said, I've also shown it to different girls I've been interested in and people I've dated, but before I had seen it, my ex in high school hated this movie. She had said, like, Summer is a bitch. She's playing with Tom's emotions the whole time, and she's rewarded for it in the end, and she doesn't learn anything. So what was the point of any of that? And she was so passionate about it that I was like, okay, damn, I'll stay away from that movie then. It sounds bad. But then when I was, I think, a sophomore in college, I was dating somebody very briefly, but I was really, really into her, and it ended badly, and I was really hung up on her for a while. So a friend of mine, Sean, showed me this movie and was like, listen, this movie meant a lot to me in high school. I think you need this. I was like, okay. And so that first time watching it, I was 100% on Tom's side the whole time. And when I saw that opening author's note of especially you, Jenny Beckman, bitch, like that whole thing, I was like, okay, I bet I know why my friend wanted to show me this, because it's going to make me feel I don't know, validated or helped me like get through my anger and sadness about this. But then when I watched the movie, as I was following Tom and I was like really sympathizing with his situation, and I was like, what, 19 years old? Everything changed when it gets to day 488 in the movie.
Which is where the movie starts.
Yeah, they show
Yeah.
the preview of it, just the quick glimpse of them sitting on the bench together, and she's got the engagement ring on. But then the emotional climax of the movie happens there too, because the whole movie's non-chronological, right? So when they finally get to 488 and she says that I just woke up one day and I knew what I was never sure of with you, I completely turned around and like realized a whole other side to this movie that upon rewatch and every single rewatch of this movie after made me see Tom as a worse and worse person.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that ultimately is what I love so much about this movie. It hits you with its like twee indie TM stuff that you would expect for like a rom-com indie movie, especially with like Zoe Deschanel. Like it hits all those beats and stylistic stuff that has gone on to influence other movies for better or worse, but is also looking that stuff in the face and saying, actually, here's a new twist on it. This movie uses that indie feeling and quirkiness and whatnot to suck you in and then tell you something new about love and what our expectations of love are, especially if you're a man who thinks you're a nice guy and is totally like self-obsessed with your pain and whatnot. How much life you could be missing out on when you're not looking and when you're not seeing things from other people's side. So that to me is the real appeal of this movie. It's what you learn from it and what you can apply to your own life for how to grow as a more empathetic and understanding man.
I appreciate your take on it, and I think that's you giving the movie much more credit than it's due. And I think that's a very generous read. It's not that I disagree with you, but I think that you're doing a lot of heavy lifting to get to a positive reading of the film.
Okay.
Because I see what you're saying, but and I agree with you to some extent. But again, like you said earlier, we're watching this as men in our late 20s and early 30s. We're watching this as men who've both been in therapy. We're as people who've been in a society that's become more socially inclusive and progressive.
Yes.
And in 2009, I was either a sophomore or junior in high school, and I was at an all-boys Catholic school. So as progressive as we could have been there, I'm sure there was like messed up stuff that was going through our heads.
Easily,
And
yeah.
like we had messed up values and ideals. So for people like that, people like me, when seeing it originally in high school, being emotionally immature and just generally immature, but mostly emotionally and socially immature, that is not the read that I got on it the first few times.
Yeah.
Even now watching it at 32, I see how you get that read. And the English teacher in me, if you gave me a paper and you backed it up with all of the evidence that you wanted to use to support it, you can make that claim. I would give you the credit, but I would say, I disagree, but you'd get the credit. You know what I mean? Just because I don't even know if the screenwriters and the director and the producers had that intention.
I think I can prove that they did. I think from the notes I've taken, I can make a good case for it as we go through this.
Excellent. Yeah, let's run through
But
it.
it's funny that you bring up the screenwriters because one of them is actually an alum of my college, and I spoke to him once. So the movie was written by Scott Neustadter and Michael Weber, who've done a lot of adaptations. They've done like Fault in Our Stars and The Disaster Artist and quite a few things. But this is one of their original films, like this and The Spectacular Now with Miles Teller and Shailene Woodley. And Michael Weber did a Zoom call with my class, one of my screenwriting like production classes, my senior year of college. And I told him how much I love 500 Days of Summer and how it means a lot to me, and I would really like to get a tattoo of Day One of Autumn on my arm. And he said, "Oh, that's sweet, but don't do that."
Good for him.
And I was like, okay, you've convinced me. So that's just a fun little aside, but it is important to note that this movie was directed by Mark Webb.
Yep.
And I saw a note that you had about that I think sums it up very well.
Yeah, so the note Steve's referring to is I thought it was very clear why Mark Webb got Amazing Spider-Man after this, just because Amazing Spider-Man is kind of a love story between Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker, which I think Mark Webb nails.
Yes.
With a lot of heavy lifting on Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's portrayals and acting in the movie.
Yes.
At the same time, it's also clear why he really fumbled Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because of 500 Days of Summer. So he knows what he's doing, but at the same time, I think when he gets a little too high concept, he loses the thread, which is kind of how I feel about 500 Days of Summer at certain points too.
Thread, web, spider.
Hey. The other thing I noticed right away is the first song that stood out to me was Regina Spektor. I forget the name of the track. Do you remember?
Us.
It was Us, yeah. Because later on, Hero comes in.
Yes.
During the pivotal Expectations reality scene.
Yep.
Which I thought was we'll talk about that later, but I loved this Regina Spektor track as an introduction to the movie. It immediately sets that time period up.
Yeah.
It immediately makes us know what kind of movie we're getting into. We know the vibe. We know it's going to be fun. We know it's going to be heartfelt. We also know it's going to be a little bittersweet and sad. And the way, again, they use Hero later on is fantastic in bookending and comparing and contrasting where we started and where we end up. But I do have to say, as much flack I give this movie, I like the soundtrack then, and nostalgically, I like it now. Like, the songs are still good. They still hold up, and this Regina Spektor track is just indicative of that in a nutshell in the first 5 minutes, you know?
Yeah, especially coming off the heels of the narrator saying, "But you should know right now, this is not a love story."
Yeah, I forgot about the
then
narrator.
The piano comes in. It's great. Which also, all these years, I did not know that the narrator is Richard McGonagle.
Who is that?
He's the voice of Sully in the Uncharted games.
Oh, that's really cool. That's interesting.
And he's fantastic. I was like, I know Sully's voice. Like, I love the Uncharted games.
Yeah.
Why did I never put that together? Like, he's been in the Telltale Batman games. I think he was Carmine Falcone in that.
I can see him doing that. He's got that kind of gravitas to his voice.
Yeah. I love him, and I can't believe all these years I never put that together. But speaking of, I think this is a really good segue, actually.
Yeah.
So we were talking about social progress and whatnot, and the narrator. The narrator comes in pretty early in the movie when talking about summer. He comes in with this line, "There are two kinds of people in this world. There's women and there's men." It's like, yep, that dates this pretty immediately. Like, beyond the music, which is great. I have the soundtrack on vinyl. I love the music in this. It definitely sets the tone well. But man, you hear a line like that now, and you're just like, ugh.
My partner and I immediately looked at each other and we were like, that's not true.
Yeah.
That is false. That is misinformation.
Same. We looked at each other and we're like, oh man, what a different time.
Right. And to be fair, I don't think when I watched this originally, even when I rewatched it in college, when things started changing socially
Mm-hmm.
to be more inclusive, I thought nothing of it.
Yeah.
But now watching it, where it's just become that much more prevalent that we should be much more inclusive to people across the gender spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
like it just makes this much less of an inclusive movie, which immediately hurts it.
Yeah.
In any kind of messaging that it might have, positive or negative, it loses credibility in my eyes, you know?
Yeah. Because when you hear, like, Tom's friend at work, Mackenzie, say some stupid incel shit,
Yeah.
it works because he's wrong. Like, you see that
Right.
he's wrong. He's a loser who's always getting drunk and talking about women in really, like, gross ways, and is never rewarded for it. He never gets a girl. Like, he never
Yeah, he
finds
notoriously
love.
does not have a girlfriend, a partner, any sort of romantic or sexual interest in the movie. Yet for some reason, he has a lot to say on the topic, which I got to say, he's a love to hate character. And I
Yes.
think he is a great portrayal of that kind of man, because I've
Mm-hmm.
had friends like that
Yep.
where they're just clearly misogynistic for the sake of it, and at the same time they also don't have a relationship, they don't get girls,
Yeah.
but you have so much to say on the topic, you know?
And the way Tom listens to him and takes his opinion seriously shows that he could be like that. That
Yep.
Tom could turn into that guy, and really any of us could too if you're not careful. And uh so when you hear him say some ignorant shit like that, like oh, Summer doesn't want a boyfriend, that means she must be a lesbian, right? When you hear him say that, it's like, okay, well, whatever, we don't have to take him seriously. When you hear the
Right.
narrator say it, it's a little different, because this is
Worse.
supposed to be someone who knows everything, you know?
Yeah, it's worse.
And so that, I think, is a knock against it, just for um, dating it in a time that was a little less aware of gender fluidity and the spectrum of gender and whatnot. But
Which also goes along with, and this is where at least one of my girlfriend notes comes up with, where the narrator talks about Summer
yes.
physically as this perfect specimen of femininity.
Mm-hmm.
I think I wrote it down. She's 121 pounds. She's a size 8 in shoes, which is considered larger by the narrator.
Yeah, slightly above
she's
average.
considered she's considered to have average height and average weight. And immediately my partner was like, size 8 shoes, it's 120. She's like, no, get that as, she's like, that's wrong right away off the bat. And especially when you're looking at movie star Zooey Deschanel ride in the black and white segment on the bike. And it's very clear that this is a Hollywood 2009
Yes.
stereotypical idea of perfection.
Yeah. My partner also had the same note, or a similar one, because she misheard it and thought the narrator said that she was a size 8, not a shoe size 8.
Oh.
So she was like, hold on, 5'5", 121 pounds, size 8. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
And then I was like, no. He said shoe size, slightly above average. And she's like, is that even above average? I was like, I don't think it is. And I was like, I don't know. That, what I find interesting about that scene is, it's the introduction to Summer, and it's all in black and white, and she's got this like retro pinup thing, like very idealistic look, very overly fantasized, right? And it's talking about all of the people that adore her. Like, she gets a reduced rate on her rent, and the ice cream shop that gets a big sales tick because she worked there. Just this effect that she has on people despite being an average girl. I like that they did it that way, because it kind of shows that everything we know about Summer is based on what men see of her.
And more specifically, what Tom sees of her.
Yes, it plays very much into his overly romanticized idea of what his dream girl is, his like the imagery of it and the putting her up on a pedestal is exactly what Tom does. And we can get more into this about who Summer is or what little we actually know of her later.
Yeah.
During some important scenes with that. But I think it's a good use of that, like, not quite realistic, almost magic realism style that the movie has of showing these things in a fantastic way to emphasize the point. And the point is, when we're following Tom, Summer is not a real person. She's just an idea.
Right. Which Matthew Gray Gubler's character, who I adore in this movie.
Yes.
And I think he should be in much more stuff. Even though I don't watch whatever CSI or whatever.
It was Criminal Minds. My mom's a big fan of that show. Yeah.
Yeah, I might watch that show just for him, just because I would need more of him in my life. I appreciate him because later in the movie when they're doing when Harry met Sally talking to the camera thing, and he tells the camera that of course he has a dream girl, and he gives all these specific ideas about what she is, but then he talks about his wife who he's been with for the last 10 years, and he goes, but she's better because she's real.
Yes.
Which is a major point in the movie that Tom misses.
Yes. And
he continues to miss it over and over and over again. Arguably at the end, which we'll talk about when we get there, but
yeah,
we can talk about it.
Oh no, we'll get to that. Yeah.
So we Tom and Summer meet at his Hallmark-esque day job where he's a card writer, which I think is an awesome job to have. I honestly would love to have that job. I think it's so great. I think he's a little privileged, especially because he's living in this beautiful city and he writes greeting cards. And he's
got a dope apartment.
Yeah, he's upset about it. Like, I don't know. Dude's got a chip on his shoulder just in general.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole thing of him, like, opening up to Summer saying, like, he was a, failed architect, like, it didn't work out. To me, that just read as, like, failed screenwriter. Like, you're not fooling me. Because, like, when you're writing movies and you don't think it's going anywhere, your instinct is to, like, make your character a writer that's down on his luck because you need to have a character at a low point and raise them up, like, I think they just kind of dropped in architect as, like, what's another creative field? So he's not just a writer.
Which I think is a legit good curveball, but also very obvious, at least in my viewing of the movie, just because I don't think he ever really dives all that much into architecture, aside from a couple of scenes where it shows them connecting or him expressing himself to her. But I only know Tom's an expert in architecture because he says he's an expert in architecture.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I don't ever really feel like he knows architecture.
Yeah,
like
for all I know,
someone like Ted Mosby.
Yeah.
Like another
oh my God,
character.
The parallels between Tom and Ted Mosby are crazy.
Right?
But yeah.
But I believe that Ted Mosby is a genuine architect. Like, I don't believe Tom Hansen is an architect. I think he's moonlighting, or he really has such low self-esteem that even when he talks about it, I don't trust his acumen because he's just that unhappy of a person,
Yeah, maybe it didn't work out for him either because he didn't believe in himself or because other people could see he didn't believe in himself. And that's why he wasn't getting anywhere with that career field, which is just funny that it ends up working, or he ends up just getting a job at a greeting card company that, I don't know, seems like a nice place to be. He seems to have a knack for it. His boss doesn't even
want to fire him.
Yeah, when he should have multiple times.
Yeah,
when he writes the roses are red, violets are blue, fuck you, whore card. Like, he should have been fired immediately for handing that
right on
in.
the spot. Yeah.
But no, Clark Gregg, another actor who should be in more things. Yeah, he's like, yeah, like, no, I'll put you on
Gifts to Hollywood
cards because you're sad, which is a great joke. Like, yeah. Anyway.
So they meet at their card company where they're working together, and immediately they hit it off because, or rather, let's rephrase. Tom hits it off with Summer
Mm-hmm.
because they ride the elevator together and he's blasting his music
Mm-hmm.
on his iPod, which definitely dates this movie.
Yep.
And he's listening to The Smiths, a
Yes.
very popular song by The Smiths.
Yep.
And Summer makes the first move, I guess, and says, "Oh, I love The Smiths." To which my partner immediately was like, "Yeah, everybody loves The Smiths. Like, it's not a crazy feeling to have. Like, you might hate Morrissey, all right, that's fine,
Yeah.
but like no one really dislikes The Smiths."
Right.
And Tom's reaction to her is immediately kind of lukewarm, probably because he's a little starstruck to some extent of putting her on a pedestal already.
Yeah.
Because the minute he saw her, he was in love with her.
Yes.
And that's actually when the days start.
Yes.
Is what I noticed, is that when he starts having feelings for her, not necessarily when their relationship begins.
Mm-hmm.
And that first day is when she's there in the office, and then it just progresses from there, especially after the Smiths scene that has become very, very, I would say infamous, but probably famous for the movie. And eventually he goes and talks to his sister, Chloe Grace Moretz, who another like very, very good casting.
Yes.
And an actor who I want to be in many more things because she's awesome in everything she does. They're playing Wii tennis. Not only made me want to bust out my Wii and play Wii tennis because it's a great game, but when she says to him that just because some girl likes the same bizarro crap as you do doesn't mean she's your soulmate, she's right.
Yeah.
100%. You can have similar interests, but it doesn't mean that you need to go be in love with one another right away. But he sees the signs in everything.
Yes. And I
Because
love the
he
fact
believes
that
in-
she wins the game of Wii tennis as soon as she
Yep.
says that. Because
Yeah.
it's just a subtle way of the movie saying, like, she's right, you know? And
She's right over
she
and
has
over again.
so many moments like that. Like, she's so often the voice of reason, which is important, not just because she's, like, younger and that's funny, but she's also a girl. And it seems
Yeah.
like Tom is caught way too much in, like, masculine ideas, and he's not listening enough to the feminine side of it, you know? So,
Right.
very important character to have voice these things.
Especially with their age gap, because I think it shows a lot about the maturity that he lacks and she possesses.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would guess that she's in her early to mid-teens. I
Yeah.
think that's what the movie's probably going for. And she is very, very clearly astute and observational and critical, but also thoughtful and understanding and compassionate.
Yeah.
And he's in his 20s and he's just so immature, which I think is a credit to the movie to display how immature men in their early 20s are. Because it's accurate. That's true. That's how it is. And whether or not that should change or whether or not that's something you want to talk about biologically with prefrontal cortexes and all that good stuff, we can get into it. But it's accurate. It's a great depiction. But also really sad that your little sister is kind of your wingman. She's the one who comes by in the rain when you break up with your dream girl and you're breaking plates in the kitchen. She's the one who walks you off the ledge. That's a little inappropriate, but kudos to her for having that maturity, you know? So what do you think about the karaoke scene where Tom and Summer have their ideology standoff, where Tom believes in love, he believes in fate and destiny and signs, and Summer, although she's been in relationships, she doesn't really believe in love. She doesn't believe in that stuff. She's just moved to this new city and she wants to have fun. She wants to make friends. She's more socially outgoing, not looking to settle down so much as Tom is.
Yes. I think, for one thing, Summer has never been shy about who she is and has always said what she believes and what she wants. So, Tom ignoring that to pursue something deeper romantically with her immediately shows he's not listening and hinders any kind of blame that you could have for Summer like messing with his feelings. You can make a case for it later depending on certain things that she does, but what do people always say is the most important thing in a relationship? Open communication. Because you have to express what your goals are and what things you want out of life to see how you match as people, how you complement each other's lives, and you can build something together as opposed to trying to be everything for someone or change them or turn them around. And my partner noted as a girlfriend note, like, I think he saw that as a challenge to change her mind about love. And that's kind of gross and kind of weird.
It's toxic masculinity. Oh, this girl doesn't believe in love. Well, I'll show her.
Yeah,
let her come and fall in love with me.
Which is, again, why I think the ending is so great, because they do and they don't learn from each other. And I'll get more into that later. But
we'll get there, yeah.
But it does set up a good question there. That's kind of, I know there's a lot of parallels between this movie and When Harry Met Sally. There's like that question in When Harry Met Sally is, can men and women be friends? And this question is love real, basically?
Right.
Or is destiny or any of that? And the great thing about both those movies is neither fully answers the question. It leaves things open enough that you can make your own deduction from it, but you can see that they have learned something and they've come up with an answer for themselves.
Yes. Funnily enough, it's kind of a comic book trope where a new writer or new artist team will come on a book and they'll destroy the status quo. And this person dies and that person gets new powers and this person's on the team, or whatever the case might be. But by the time their tenure is done on their run on whatever book they're writing, they kind of put the toys back in the box so that the next team coming on can continue and it'll be a fresh slate, or they can pick up whatever pieces left by the previous team. And I think that's something that you're saying about both movies. They do it well. They ask a big question. The movie has an answer to the question. I think When Harry Met Sally does have a definitive answer, but it doesn't leave you, it doesn't tell you that you're wrong if you disagree with it. Whereas I think 500 Days of Summer is even more vague, especially by that ending scene. I think it had an answer and then it walks it back very quickly. But I think I agree with you. Yeah, they're both very good at throwing the ball up in the air and then letting it land at the end. And you're kind of in the same place, but you're looking at it from a different perspective, which makes it all new again, which I think is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I will... Yeah, I'll get into that ending later. What I personally think is set up as like the answer they come to, but I also kind of don't want a definitive answer about something that big and broad in a movie, because that just seems arrogant to have someone think they can tell you the answer. You know, like is love real? And someone's going to tell you, yes, exactly. This is it. This is the proof. It's like, bruh, like that's a little know-it-all to tell me that you know for a fact something that broad that no one can actually answer.
I think that's such a fair reading, and that's something that I got to break out of my own box when I'm looking at things, because I teach students to prepare for the New York State Regents, and part of that is teaching them to derive the central idea, to derive the theme that the author is trying to say. And we try to encourage them to have very clear, very specific themes about what the author's opinions are. So I should break out of my box of trying to look at media to have very clear themes, because I agree with you. I think that is extremely arrogant on the creator's end to say, this is what you should think about such and such topic. I like that. Like that a lot.
But to answer your original question about the karaoke scene,
Oh yeah.
so aside from that whole ideological standoff and Mackenzie just being like Mackenzie just being like a drunk asshole and saying like, "Oh my God, she's a dude," because you think like you don't
Yeah.
want to be attached, all that stuff. He in that scenario when you see the real conversations happening between Tom and Summer and Mackenzie's just there fucking things up. It reminds me of when I would play Super Smash Brothers with my friends that are actually good at it, and I was just there trying. Like I was more like a stage hazard than anything else. I wasn't actually involved. That's I love scenes like that. I love when you've got like a comedic relief character that's not actually contributing anything important, but you still kind of need him there.
Yes, I think that was my favorite scene with him. That and the clapping scene later on, where he's clearly wrong for clapping. He's great at comic relief, but he does do something in that karaoke scene. He's the one who drunkenly tells Summer that Tom likes her.
That's exactly what I was going to say, and this is, I think, the most paramount thing for Tom's character. Tom doesn't do anything.
Nope.
He doesn't ask Summer out. He just like makes a lot of inferences based on like, oh, she said her weekend was good, and so like she's getting banged by some dude at the gym. Like
again, incredibly misogynistic reading immediately on his part. Like
he's so infatuated with her without actually putting himself out there and, you know, I don't know, maybe asking her some questions about herself or anything like that. So his constant attitude is just waiting for her to come to him.
Yep.
And waiting for her to take the action. And when she says like, "So you like me as friends?" He's like, "Yeah, sure, just friends." Or, "Hey, I'm not looking for anything serious." He's like, "Yeah, I can do that." He's so passive the whole time and doesn't stick up for himself or what he wants until it's like exploding by getting into a bar fight or something and then like making himself out to be the victim for it. Like, but we'll get to that too. I think this is just a through line for him the whole time of him just not being the one to ask or take initiative. And that entitledness is really what drives me crazy about him.
I think it's a sense of entitlement, and I also think it's this nice guy syndrome that he has, where he believes that if he doesn't rock the boat, then he'll be good, or he'll be seen as good.
Yes.
And by not rocking the boat, that means he doesn't really have an opinion on anything overtly, even though he might inwardly have an opinion.
Yep.
But by being afraid to express that opinion, including telling the Summer, "Hey, I do like you. Hey, I don't want to have something casual." And there goes our movie because she would stop seeing him. So he has to kind of do that. But again, I think he's a great example of young men in their 20s that they're just going to say yes to whatever the pretty girl says, because ultimately they just want to sleep with her.
Yeah.
And the way that they can sleep with her is just by agreeing, going with it, no matter how they feel, whether that's actually in agreement. Then problems will occur later on, as they do in 500 Days of Summer. But
this is why I'm so grateful that my friend showed me this movie, because it was basically his way of telling me, look, dude, you're dangerously close to becoming like this guy. I think you need to see this movie and see why you gotta stop. And it worked because I could feel myself going down that path as a young man. I was very like, I don't want to say bitter, but I could have been, I could have been entitled and having the nice guy problem. Like, it could have gotten a lot worse if I didn't take the time to reflect and grow and recognize that I will always have to do that throughout my life,
Right. Which Tom doesn't do.
No.
And even when Mackenzie low-key makes the move for Tom, he can't pick the ball up. Even still, Summer kind of sets him up because she's clearly flirting with him. And Zooey Deschanel, although I do not I would say she's not my cup of tea as
Same.
an actress. She does a great job in this scene
Yeah.
and throughout the movie. She's really, really good. And she's got that little twinkle in her eye and she goes, oh, so just as friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she plays it so well. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt with that big gulp and he goes, yeah, just as friends. And
Yeah.
even when they're at work a couple days later and they're making the copies, she's the one who makes the legitimate first move, albeit a very weird one.
It is weird.
Because it's very awkward, and on her end, it's very awkward, but maybe she's just an awkward person. And goes up and kisses him at the copiers.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't know what to do. And he has, I think that's my favorite depiction of sex hair I've ever seen in any movie, even though they don't have sex at that moment. His hair is so disheveled that it's just like he might as well have had sex at that moment, you know?
That scene is great, but also, yeah, confounding. And I think that's one of the times where they throw something like that in there to maybe give Tom a case that you can sympathize with him and be like, oh, he's completely at her mercy and feel for him a little bit. I don't think it's true, but I think you could make the case for it in that
I
sense
think you can make
because
that
she's
case.
such a whirlwind of like just kind of doing what she wants and taking initiative when he won't. And I think really the most unrealistic thing is why she's interested in him, because he's not very charming, and I don't think she has as much stock in like the things they have in common as he does. Which is so interesting because when people see this movie, I think they either don't want to hate Tom because it's played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, because he's such a sweetheart and like a good actor, that they kind of forget that he's supposed to be. This is very much in line with like Michael Cera in Scott Pilgrim.
Yes.
Which, like, I have to say this as an aside. 500 Days of Summer, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, American Psycho, Fight Club. These are all movies that have such bad reputations because people like them for the wrong reasons.
They miss the point.
They completely miss the point. They miss that they're either like satires on or deconstructions of the genres they're in. And people either like it for the wrong reasons or hate it because of the people who like it for the wrong reasons. Like all the dude bros who love Fight Club and don't know that it's like a commentary on toxic masculinity written by a gay man. Like, it's very, very different than what you're getting out of it.
Yeah.
Scott Pilgrim, very much the same thing, especially when you have a sweetheart like Michael Cera playing this objectively pretty terrible person. And it's tricky to do an unlikable protagonist, like a lot of what's his name, John Cusack characters, like in High Fidelity, or being John Malkovich. Like, he's really good at that. It's hard to do an unlikable protagonist, and I think when you have someone as, you know, cute and lovable as JGL, the point can be lost sometimes.
Right. And speaking of him being unlikable, Laura and I thought their running through IKEA to be extremely unlikable.
Yes.
Because no one would do that. as romantic as it is way more twee looking, feeling while watching that, and it's annoying.
Yeah.
It was utterly like disruptive to my watching this time around, and I think that's because I've been to IKEA and I've gotten angry at people being in my way, and they weren't even running around IKEA. It was just them like window shopping.
Yeah.
So here's this dumb young couple in their 20s on a bed, while me, the stand-in for the Chinese family watching them, wants that bedroom. Get out of my way. I want to look at the bed. Like, you're in my way, you know? Like,
I think part of the reason that hits so sour now is because of all the stupid movies that this movie inspired that would do dumb shit like that.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it's like, is it the fault of the original one if it works? Maybe it doesn't work so much now, but I also get the point of it. And like, when you're young and in a new relationship and everything seems great and you're so excited, you do dumb shit like that. You do like cutesy, annoying stuff in public that no one else is going to be on board with because no one else cares about you two as much as you two do. Right. So yeah, I get the point of it. That's one of those gotta turn my brain off moments for me because it fits in with the whole magical realism thing that they're going for and a lot of the scenes and style of the movie.
Which actually happens, that magical realism, I guess, or that stylistic break that Webb goes with happens after their first time having sex.
Oh, okay. So we're going to get into the best scene in the movie then.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that you call this the best scene because I know that between the two of us, you like the movie and you appreciate it. I also agree. This is the best scene in the movie.
Yeah.
After this, it is not that it's downhill. It's just there's less for me to look forward to in the movie because I remember what comes. I know what's going to happen. And this scene happens. And every time I see this, I'm just like, yeah. I'm smiling. I'm like, yeah, Tom, good for you, Tom. Like, I'm actually rooting for him in this scene.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the post-sex scene, when Tom and Summer have sex for the first time, he wakes up the next morning, he's on his way to work, and he is just dancing through the street. It's playing You Make My Dreams by Hall & Oates. He looks in the reflection of a car and sees himself as Han Solo, and a whole marching band and parade and flash mob breaks out as they're all dancing with him. And it's, I can't imagine a better scene to portray the feeling of like excitement and happiness of sleeping with somebody for the first time, someone that you're really into. Like, it's just the best. And it's set up great. Like, I love that scene. It's so funny. I think it's tied for the best scene with another scene that we'll get to later that is very different, very tonally different, and it's an expectations versus reality scene. Like that.
I was gonna say, I wasn't sure what you were referring to, but
I think just on
I
a
agree
craft
with you.
level, that's
yeah. We'll talk about that. Yeah, we have to.
Yeah.
Laura was doing some research because she and I talked a lot about this after we watched it. And she went down whatever Reddit rabbit hole or YouTube video essay hole, and she discovered that one of the screenwriters, I'm not sure which one, but I know that at some point she said that one of the screenwriters included the morning after from Summer's point of view.
Oh.
Which, for this movie, we don't get Summer's point of view at all, which I think would be a boon and make it a better movie overall.
Yes.
Similar to When Harry Met Sally. This is much more Tom's movie, whereas When Harry Met Sally, it explores it both from Harry and Sally's point of view, which is why I like that movie better.
Mm-hmm.
But in this cut-out scene of Summer the morning after sleeping with Tom the first time, apparently she was bored and in bed. And it was just her kind of staring off, being dazed and like yawning, clearly nonplussed, whereas he just had the best night of his life.
Yeah.
And I think, narratively speaking, I think it's a great idea to cut that from the movie.
Yes.
Because it's really reinforcing that this is Tom's point of view. It's reinforcing that we're not supposed to sympathize with Summer in the movie. Right. But as we get older, we become more empathetic to characters outside of our point of view. Mm-hmm. And I really wish that scene was still there, especially now that I'm older.
Yeah.
I wish more people would see that first to kind of give Summer more credit and more grace. Because I don't think she's a perfect character, but I don't think she is this villain that she's kind of made out to be, or this apathetic villain to some extent. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was very interesting that they cut that scene very specifically, and they left in his crazy, fun, Disney-esque scene, you know?
You know how Stephenie Meyer rewrote the first Twilight book to be from Edward's perspective?
Yeah.
I want that for this movie.
I would love that movie. I said the same exact thing to Laura. The Brutalist is 3.5 hours and there's a 15-minute intermission. I would sit for 4 hours watching 500 Days of Summer and then a 15-minute break and then 500 Days of Tom. I would love that movie.
It'd be less like twee indie comedy and turn into just like a horror movie.
It would be the French films that he sits through later on, just from her point of view.
Okay, so not long after that, as their relationship is starting to really blossom, something really, really important happens where they're getting closer, and Tom is in Summer's apartment, which usually they go to her, or they go to his place, but this time they went to hers. And she tells him, or they're talking about like common dreams they have and fears and stuff, and she starts telling him these really personal stories. Now, the whole time she's talking, we're hearing the narrator talking over it about what's going through Tom's mind as she's talking. And we don't hear what she's actually talking about. But at the end of it, we hear her say, "I've never told that to anyone before." And his response is, "I guess I'm not just anybody."
He's the villain.
He is absolutely the villain. He is, like, this displays his narcissism very well, because what else could you say when someone tells you something extremely personal they've never told anyone else before? I don't know.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I feel so special.
Thank you. That I'm honored. That's horrible if it's a bad story, or that's amazing if it's a good one. Like, or ask a follow-up question about it, something. And instead, he takes that opportunity to prop himself up and fuel his desire and frustration to declare them boyfriend, girlfriend, to label it as something, which is something she said from the start she did not want to do. So this, I think, is why we don't know much about Summer, because the whole point is that we're following Tom, and Tom doesn't really know Summer. He just knows her in the idealized version. That is the whole point. That might be the only example I can think of a good way to underwrite a female character.
Agreed. Yeah.
That's the stuff that I think makes it too obvious that we're supposed to follow Tom but not agree with him.
Right. She is supposed to be a 2D character in this movie because that supports Tom's purview.
Yeah.
Right. That supports his perspective of everything, which we're ultimately supposed to empathize with. And I think that's why that makes this a hard movie for me to like, because I'm more well-read. I've seen more movies. I've interacted with more things now. And it's just like, dude, no, you're clearly the issue.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of combative with the perspective of the film, because while I agree with everything you've been saying, and I agree with the screenwriter's point of view and whatnot, it's still just like, no, but like what you're making kind of still makes him out to be the one who I'm supposed to feel for. And I don't really feel for him when he's really missing the mark in these big ways.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up, because the next important scene is the bar fight. Yeah. This is where all of that, I think, comes to a head. Also, by the way, I think it's interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like your perspective in watching it now, having grown up and like seen more things and kind of being like, yeah, I get it with the point of this movie, is you almost feel like you're fighting it. Is that like you're almost like, I can see this, why can't you? Yes, it's frustrating to watch. Yeah, I wouldn't say that this was like a hate watch of a movie, because I do enjoy watching this film. I have a good time. I'm smiling, I'm laughing, it's funny. I can see how it's problematic, and I'm good. But I'm really frustrated with Tom as a character. Yeah. And I think that's more indicative of me just being a person who would not have... I would not have friends who are in their early 20s right now, because I would think they're annoying and stupid, and I'd want to shake them. But this movie I don't think is for me anymore, because when it was for me, I liked it. Yeah. As I've gotten older and I've reflected on it, I like it less so.
So
Yes.
I really wrestle with Tom being the protagonist, the one who I'm supposed to sympathize with, when frankly I think Summer is a more interesting character.
Yeah.
And I think this scene with the fight is where she becomes more interesting.
Yes. So my partner had a really, really good note about this. Now, aside from, you know, uh, like when the date starts or the scene starts and they're at the bar and Tom's just being like cynical and judging women's fashion and stuff while he's wearing a hoodie and a tie. Like, okay,
Yeah.
bro. She's just so over it in this moment. You can see how like annoyed she is, and she tries to make a joke and he doesn't get it and all that. And then the douchebag finance bro comes over and starts hitting on her right in front of him. And my partner had an interesting point. She said, it's good that he let Summer stick up for herself at the bar, but to punch the guy after he, Tom, was the target of the insult shows he only cares about himself. He could have stood up for her when the guy wouldn't leave, but he just cowered down and sipped his drink instead. And that, I think, goes well into the whole, like, he doesn't speak up, he doesn't take action thing.
Until it's too late, until he blows up.
Yeah. He, this guy is, like, so textbook douchey, and he's going up to her and, like, hitting on her real hard and clearly just, like, it's so over the top that it's hilarious that, like, he doesn't care about her. He's just going through the list of things to say of, like, let me buy you a drink, all that. So for Tom to, like, I could see the pro of Tom sitting back and letting her speak for herself, because she does handle herself very well. But when he's given the opportunity to speak up, he doesn't take it until the actual thing the guy says is, I can't believe this is your boyfriend. And that insult is targeted at him. That's when he punches the guy. And then they go home to Summer's apartment. And when she says that that was uncool of him to do, which it was, he's being the victim again and saying, like, I got my ass kicked for you.
Which I hated that line. That
Yep.
really bothered me, because she puts it perfect right after that. She goes, how does that help me?
Yeah.
Oh, that was for me? And it's like, yeah, dude, that wasn't for her. You know that wasn't for
No.
her. Like, I thought she was so valid for getting angry at Tom in that moment. And this is why I think she's a much more interesting character, because she was giving Tom grace. You could see she's bored at the bar with him, but she's still on a date with him, and she's still respecting that. But getting home, really calling him out on it, and respectfully so calling him out on it, she did nothing wrong.
No.
In that moment, I appreciate how she said to the guy, no, thank you, I'm good, and didn't even involve Tom in it. She's an independent person.
Yes.
And Tom can't handle that because he's a dependent person.
Yes. And I think the whole thing, unfortunately, gets undercut by her going over to his place after in the rain and apologizing. But my partner had another girlfriend note here
Yeah.
that I think makes this make sense. So she said, I think Summer's tendency to run from the things she's afraid of, like a relationship or hurting Tom's feelings and breaking up with him, is very relatable, not just as a woman, but as a person. And I think that's what's happening here. I think she does care about Tom and doesn't want to hurt him. That's why she doesn't break up with him sooner, and he just kind of like pushes her to a breaking point with the pancakes later. It's because she doesn't want to hurt him, and she does care about him, but she also has to do what's right for her, too. Unfortunately, she hadn't figured that out yet at this point, because she thought she needed to go appease him, because he was the one who was physically hurt. And when she says that she shouldn't have gotten mad at him, and that's what she's apologizing for, he immediately goes to the part of the argument that's about the label on their relationship. It's like, that's not the point.
Yep, he totally missed the point of why she was upset. He did not validate her in any way, shape, or form, and he made it about himself yet again and his issue with the relationship that he has not spoken about and just let boil over. He that scene is, I think, where audiences could start to make the argument that Summer drops the ball with him.
Yes.
She was direct with him. She was direct with him in this point too, but she should have left at this point. She should have stayed away if she really did care about him, which I think she does. I agree with you, and maybe I should even rephrase that now. She should have stayed away ultimately because it was the better thing for both of them.
Yes.
And she has clearly shown that she is capable of making those decisions because she's capable of setting very strong, positive, clear boundaries. But in this moment, she sees that she hurt Tom. And like you said, she cares about him. Maybe less so romantically, or beginning to be less romantically at this point. But she cares about him on a human level. She even calls him the dreaded words best friend later on.
Oh, yeah.
In the diner. And I think that's why Summer is so fascinating, because while up until this point she is the manic pixie dream girl, right? And after this point she quote unquote messes up by staying with him. But the girlfriend note that Laura had here was that she enjoys the attention.
Yeah.
Which, to her credit, every human enjoys attention.
Yeah.
It just makes her more human, which I think this is where she grows from being a two-dimensional dream girl to being a much more interesting character who I think I'd like to see a movie from her point of view about.
Yeah.
Because she's flawed, and I think her flaw, which she knows about by the end of the movie, it makes her more relatable. And it makes her easier to care about because she's not perfect. She knows she's imperfect from the very beginning, but she's not afraid to say she's imperfect.
Yeah.
And I just find that more interesting than Tom's, oh man, oh shucks kind of attitude that he has, you know?
I had read something in your notes about how she says, or when he says, like, I just need to know that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and feel differently. And she says, I can't give you that. No one can. And how that's important because that's what any relationship is. And that's the risk you take in being in a relationship. Not only is that a great summation of, like, one of the themes of the movie, it's also great foreshadowing for the end.
It is.
There's a lot of great little moments like that. And I think a lot of what works about the structure of this movie being non-chronological is that it sets the pacing and the ramping up, the escalating of the stakes very well, because it gives you all the information you need at all the right times. Like the fact that the first real scene we see outside of the intro of like day 48 and like him seeing her on the first day and stuff is day 290 when they break up, and he declares at the end of that scene, I don't want to get over her, I want to get her back. Okay, that's the goal of the protagonist established right there. You wouldn't get that if you just saw this whole thing chronologically, and you wouldn't care as much following it because you don't have the will they, won't they push and pull if you were just seeing, like, it started, it ended, now he wants her back. Like, that's boring. Especially when they cut back and forth between scenes that have parallels. Like, the first time we see them in IKEA is him making references to the first time they were actually at IKEA hundreds of days before. And it's not hitting the same anymore. She seems bored and it's not working. But we see that the first time that they did that it was this cute thing between them. Or when he sees the I love us card and he's sad, and then it cuts to when he came up with the idea for the I love us card because he was looking at her. These are just great moments peppered throughout that show you what they had, what they lost, and what does that mean now? Is it worth getting back or not? That's what we're following, you
I
know?
think this is another reason why I struggle with this movie, because structurally, 5-star movie for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we are talking craft, if we are talking how they do it, how they write it, everything, the acting, everything, it's fantastic. I cannot knock it. And any way that I can knock it, it's like, all right, well, no one's perfect, right? But it's more, my issue with the movie is definitely more emotional and subjective and personal
Mm-hmm.
as a viewer, not as someone looking at how they shot it and how they created it. Because, like you said, the will they won't they needs to be there because that's the hook of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But the movie's whole point is the subversion of the will they won't they.
Yeah.
And they're just inviting you in through that frame, kind of like Don to Don being about a cult and monsters. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, it's actually about these two young outsiders who strike up a romance and genuinely validate one another.
Yeah.
There's an inroad for people that people are used to, but it's not what it's about.
Yeah.
And only once you have watched the whole thing can you say, "Oh yeah, this is not really a romantic comedy. This is a movie about love. It's not a love story."
Yes, exactly. And I think the girl he takes on the blind date or the setup date,
That was so
named
sad.
Allison, like that, she just straight up tells him exactly the point of the movie and he ignores it. Like, she's like, she didn't cheat on you, she didn't take advantage of you in any way, and she told you she didn't want a boyfriend. And just kind of says it matter of factly for him, but is still kind of like way more attentive of his feelings than she needed to be, or like he deserved. And
I wish she went a step further and really dragged him across the coals too in that moment,
Mhm.
because he still doesn't get the message even when she lays it out very compassionately towards
yeah,
him.
and I feel so bad for that girl, but like he's just not gonna listen at this point, and it's I'm glad that it ends with her exhausting her empathy and leaving on her own.
Yeah.
It could have happened at any point sooner than that, so it even tells us a little bit about her. It's like, is she that desperate that she's still staying on this date just to see what happens and then hit a breaking point? Or is she just kind enough to listen to this guy until he's drunkenly singing karaoke, making a fool of himself, trying to recreate things with Summer, with her? Like, whatever it is, I think it told us a lot about a very minor character, that she stuck around, listened to him, and then hit her point of just being like, nah, fuck this guy. And an interesting note my partner had was, when she asks, did she take advantage of you in any way? Tom's like, no. And my partner thought that was an interesting question because, like yours said about her liking the attention and kind of playing with Tom's feelings and stuff, you could make a case that she does because Summer's not perfect. You know, she's not completely in the right the whole time.
I think she only takes advantage of him when she goes back after the bar fight.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the only moment that I really feel like, oh, Summer, you're better than that. Like,
Yeah.
you should have stayed away. You can clearly see how down bad Tom is for you,
Yeah.
and you're taking advantage of it because you like the attention. So I would agree with your partner in that aspect, but I think that might be that and one other scene later on before the expectations reality moment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's another scene where
All
I
right.
think Summer, she's iffy, but she does something very human.
So let's get to that because my partner also clocked that when they're on the train to the wedding and they run into each other, that Summer's doing all the asking, saying like, you know, are you still working for Vance and stuff? And Tom doesn't ask her what she's doing for work these days. No, she doesn't work
'Cause he doesn't care.
Because he doesn't care. Because he's a bitter little man. And so that's an interesting thing. But I noticed when they're dancing together at the wedding that her left hand is perfectly in frame on his shoulder, and you can see there's no engagement ring.
Yeah.
So you don't know to expect that unless you've seen the movie already. So I think that's a great little thing to just on a rewatch, just to reinforce that, like, she really hadn't been asked yet. Like, she did not receive the ring yet when she asked Tom to come to the party, that she was really just offering out of kindness and maybe hoping to, reestablish their friendship. Um, so yes, obviously she was seeing another guy and she didn't bring that up, but I guess at least she wasn't engaged. So is it a lie of omission? Maybe, maybe not, but it's not an engagement party, so there's that.
Nor does she really owe Tom anything like that. She doesn't
That's
have
true.
to tell him that she's seeing someone. She doesn't need to say that, nor did he ask. If he asked, I would bet that she would say, yeah, I've been seeing this guy. I don't think
Yeah.
she would hide it
No, she wouldn't.
because
Yeah, she would
she's
not
honest.
hide that.
Yeah. But I think where she does take advantage of him at the wedding is by dancing with him
Mm-hmm.
and is by having this romantic night together,
Yeah.
which my partner and I watched a video essay about the movie after, and the person in the video said that it's almost an objectively romantic scene
Yeah.
between Summer and Tom where they're dancing at the wedding. And the person in the video mentioned how this is a very human thing to do because even though at the time Summer is not engaged,
Mm-hmm.
being at the wedding with Tom, you're surrounded by romance.
Yeah.
So with Summer dancing with Tom, she has this moment where they are enveloped in love and they dance together and she does not have the spark.
Mm-hmm.
So that just affirms how she feels about Tom, that she was right.
Yeah.
That it's just not there for her with him. And that's just something that Tom has to struggle with. But my partner also made the observation that perhaps, because this is close to the time they go and see The Graduate together,
Mm-hmm.
where Summer's crying watching the vague scene at the end of The Graduate, perhaps at this moment, Summer had already met the guy who proposes to her, and Summer realizes Tom's not the one for me.
You think that's when it happened?
That was my partner's guess. That
Or
was
what
where
she said,
Summer
yeah.
starts. Yeah, that's where she thinks that Summer starts to realize this relationship is over, because sometime in that interim, Summer might have had a spark with someone else, and she's kind of seeing that at this movie. She's coming to the realization she doesn't have it with Tom, and then they break up.
Yeah.
And then she does the human thing. You're going to check on how it is with one of your exes while you're in a relationship that might be getting serious with someone. So you go out for coffee or whatever. That's what the YouTuber said, which I haven't done, but I understand.
Yeah.
And her going to the wedding with him and dancing, and it's just not there for her. It just validates that. So at the party where she is wearing the ring, it's not really that big of a deal to her at that point.
Yeah.
She's engaged. Like, it's just a big deal to him because it's all about him. It's not about her.
Yeah. Yeah, and you make a good point that if he asked, she would have said. So, like, yeah, it probably would have come up if he cared enough to ask.
Tom's still the villain.
Also, does it seem like an objectively romantic scene just because we've been following Tom, and because the whole movie really is Tom's perspective? Are we just seeing it that way? Like, if we had seen the 500 Days of Tom, that's all from Summer's perspective, would this wedding scene have a different, like, color grading or, like, different musical moments? Like, would it be Sweet Disposition by the Temper Trap again? Would it be
right.
I don't know. Interesting questions, but I've never thought about that she's crying at The Graduate because she felt the spark with someone else. To me, I think it was just enough. I mean, that's possible, but I think it's enough that she just sees it and knows it's not working with him.
Yeah.
And of course, it's the movie that he misread as a kid and loved because he didn't get the point at the end of it. So again, another one of, like, Phew, you know,
Yep.
the point going way over his head. Um,
And that
but
brings us to the second big scene
yes,
that we
expectations
both love
versus
in the movie.
reality.
Yeah, this is where Regina Spektor comes back,
Hmm.
and it's Mark Webb telling us, "Hey, the story's coming to an end because this is the bookend, but we don't get us, we get Hero,"
Hmm.
and it is gorgeous the way this part is shot. I I remember having this on DVD and kind of wearing it out in college, watching it both with friends and girlfriends or dates or whatever, and we would replay this scene just to focus on the
Hmm.
left because we'd want to see the expectations, and then we'd go back to the reality, and then we would have to watch it again just to see, oh wow, it's kind of like those highlights books when we're kids trying to spot the differences between
Oh yeah,
the two images. And this scene is just astounding to me because it's almost silent too.
yeah.
There's not that much dialogue, but you don't need the dialogue because they just act the hell out of these scenes both
Hmm.
times.
It's paced so well that I can't even conceptualize how they timed it out to know that the takes they were getting were going to allow you to see what was happening on both sides at the same time and take both pieces of information in. Like, just the fact that he starts farther down the hallway in one side than on the other. So there's time to see the difference between how he thinks she'll greet him at the door and how she does. Um, because yeah, sometimes you do have to pause it and be like, okay, I'm gonna do the whole side on the left and then the whole side on the right, rewatch it. But you do get it all in the one. And then the end of it, when the reality side slides over and the way that's framed, and then it goes over to him seeing her engagement ring. I mean, just masterful,
It's a gut
masterful
punch.
filmmaking.
Yeah,
Like,
it's fantastic.
ah, and yeah, from there he, becomes a drunk Twinkie eating
Yeah,
despondent
yeah.
person
He hits
yelling
the
"get a room" at
stereotypes.
people in the in the street, and he goes
He
on
has
his
his
tirade
breakdown.
at work, and
Yep. That was
which
such a weird scene to me. I never really thought of greeting cards as a moral, but I don't really value greeting cards in
yeah,
that way. I don't know.
I think watching it now. Um, okay, side note: when I was in an acting class in college, uh, I did the Day 488 park scene with a partner, an acting partner, for a class. And we like made people cry with it. Like we did a really good job with it. And I had a friend who did the greeting card monologue from that movie. Um, and so I've always thought like, yeah, Tom really has a good point about um the perpetuation of like the things that he was led to believe and like feels betrayed by of romance and like pop songs like love songs and greeting cards, like these empty hollow things that don't really get to the root of how complex love is, if it's even real. I i used to think that he had a really good point. This was something that actually kind of changed for me as I rewatched it this time. I don't Nobody at the greeting card company was ever like rude or manipulative or backstabby or even like general like corporate awful. There was nothing like that. It was a very fine place to work. They all like propped Rhoda up with her cat cards and stuff. Like they were encouraging to each other, and Vance gave Tom way more chances than he deserved. This is purely just how he feels
Yeah.
about the nature of the hollowness of greeting cards and
Hmm.
stuff, and pop songs and all the things that he feels lied to by. But at some point, I think you just have to outgrow that, you
Yeah.
know? you just get over it and be like, okay, maybe there's more to life than this, and maybe humans are more complex than this, and I just need to grow up, and that's a rude awakening, but I don't know. I think his speech, I think it works to show us how he feels, but I don't think he's right.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, it's a separation of what the movie is trying to say versus what a character in the movie
It's
is
like
saying.
what Aaron Sorkin said about the "You Can't Handle the Truth" monologue that he wrote for Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, and that he has people coming up to him telling him that that is their favorite speech ever, uh, that they've used it as uh, like a pep talk speech at halftime for their sports teams when they're a coach or something. And he's just like, the villain of the movie's the one saying that, right? Like, I
Mhm.
don't, just because I wrote it doesn't mean I agree with it.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is this character believes it. I don't need to believe it. The character does. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at with the greeting cards are evil. People should say how they feel speech that
Yeah.
he does when he quits his job. Also, side note, why don't you just get a blank card?
Right. Right. It's a
Like,
very easy problem to solve that he can't see the solution to, much
yeah,
like most of the film.
yeah.
You said he doesn't get his rude awakening in growing up and like growing out of these ideas of the lies, according to him, of the pop songs, of the greeting cards, of the romance movies that he watched. Do you think that he gets a rude awakening on day 488 on the bench that we finally get to at the end of the movie?
Um,
Would you consider that a rude awakening for Tom?
I think his breakdown at work and finding out that she's engaged and stuff, I think that sets him up for the soft landing that 488 ends up being. I
Mm,
think because when he says goodbye to her at the end, says, "I really do hope that you're happy," I believe him. I
yeah,
believe that it's not over because it's not the 500th day. He
right.
still has his feelings about it, but he's at least accepted that. I guess we could just get into that scene now, but he I think he's accepted that she's learned too and learned something from him, and as someone or for someone as self-absorbed as Tom is, I think that probably speaks to him pretty well that he feels
Hmm.
like he made an impact on her. So maybe he should listen to what she's saying for the first time, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I think her. She's. I was gonna say her being direct with him for the first time, but that's not true.
Mm.
Her being blunt with him and saying how after he says, "How did you know it was him?"
Mm-hmm.
when you said yes to marrying him. He said you didn't want to be someone's girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
but now you're somebody's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, "Yeah, it surprised me too." Which again, kudos to Summer. Like she's trying to discover herself just like any other human is.
Yeah.
And when she gives their love story so simply, she's like, "I was at a cafe reading Dorian Gray and
Mm-hmm.
he asked me about it." My partner
Yeah.
mentioned at that moment that, "Oh, wow, this guy made a move on Summer,
Yes.
was active
Exactly.
versus Tom's passivity." Um,
Which is not to say that men are always the ones who have to make a move.
no,
It's
no,
that's not the point. The point is Tom was whining about never getting anywhere with her when he wasn't taking initiative. Where this
right.
guy just asked her. It was that simple.
And he wasn't rude. He wasn't gross. He just asked her about something she was clearly interested in or an activity she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And by showing that he cared about her,
Yeah.
even in the slightest thing, as strangers, um, that's more attractive to Summer than all of Tom.
Yes.
And that's why she can easily, well, maybe not easily, but she can definitively say she knew what she wanted with him versus not knowing with
Mm-hmm.
Tom.
Yes. And she says, like, I just woke up one day and I knew what I was never sure of with you. When she said that line, when I saw that for the first time, that's where the whole movie clicked for me.
Yep.
Because I was that angry, hurt little boy watching it the first time, and that's where it all started to recontextualize for me. And I think Tom has a similar moment because he starts crying and says, like,
Yeah.
you know, it sucks when you realize love and destiny is all bullshit. And she's just like, no, when I realized I could have gone anywhere else for lunch or got there 10 minutes later or something, and this never would have happened, I thought Tom was right. It just wasn't me you were right about. This is what I love, that they both learn something from each other, and that, yeah, he was right that love is real. I guess you could say, like, that's what they've both come to from this. But destiny, it's like, that's kind of not as clear. Like, she seems to believe that now. He doesn't know if he can believe in that again because he was so sure about Summer. But it wasn't mutual, and that's the problem. He was so caught up in how sure he was of her that he thought he had to be right, that he had to be, or this had to be destiny because he found some cute girl that liked the Smiths and had the same, like, nostalgic interests that he did. And because she's just naturally amazing and it makes him feel better that that's what it is. That's what love is, so that has to be right. So I don't know if it's a rude awakening per se, but it's enough to shake him up and be like, okay, if she could learn that love is real, what do I take from this? You know?
Yeah.
And it's not until the very last day, the 500th day, that becomes the first day of autumn, that, I mean, this is what we've been building to. This does Tom learn anything in the end?
This is objectively, unequivocally, definitively my least favorite scene in the movie.
Okay.
It pisses me off to no end.
Okay.
The first time I saw it, I was smiling. I was like, you got me, Mark Webb.
Mm-hmm.
You got me. But watching it again, I'm just so angry in this scene. I'm so happy that Tom is pursuing architecture because I think he's trying to fulfill himself outside of romance, which I think is great.
Yes.
I think that is genuine growth. At least in that one facet, I will say Tom has grown some because he's getting away from the job that he claimed to hate so bad.
Mm-hmm.
So he's at this architecture interview, and there's the young, attractive woman.
Minka Kelly.
Yes. Who I wish... I would watch 500 Days of her as long as he's not in it too. Like, because I like her, and in the scene, she's another well-casted actress right then and there. She just plays it perfectly. I could watch a movie based on her perspective of her relationship, potential relationship, whatever might happen with Tom after 500 Days of Summer ends. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. Again, my partner notes he makes the first move with her.
Yes.
Because he says to her, he's like, oh, you're my competition. So he's flirting a little bit right off the bat, which is nice to see. So there are these little pieces of growth. He's going on the interview. He makes a move with the girl right away.
Yes.
And then the narrator kicks in as he's called in after they have their little flirtation back and forth. And the narrator is saying to the extent that Tom has learned that almost explicitly, I think, if I remember correctly, that Tom has changed, that while love might be a true thing and it's real and whatnot, there's no such thing as cosmic signs. There's no such thing as
coincidence. That's all it ever is.
Yep. And he stops in his tracks, and Tom walks back And then the narrator goes, on second thought.
Yeah, he was pretty sure.
I hated that. I just, you just unwound an hour and 40 minutes of my life to see this guy change in the most minute and, like, to me, superficial ways, on the grand scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
I would really, really hope that if Tom and Autumn do pursue a relationship, after she even has her hesitance about going to get coffee with him, which, like, good for her. Good for you, Minka Kelly. I would really, really hope and love to see a Tom who's interested in her, who's asking about her, who lets her be a person. I think if the movie continued in that way, or there was another film or anything like that, that we could see Tom with this new person acting differently, then okay. Then I think I would be much more forgiving to how I read 500 Days of Summer. But with it ending on him looking in the camera to say, like, hey, you thought I learned something? Bet again.
Okay. So I see what you're saying. And I think there's some truth to it. But that is not how I read it. And I think certain bits of the ambiguity of it, excuse me, work to its advantage. Now, like I had said earlier, I don't want a story to tell me love is real or love isn't real, because that's stupid. Like that would be ridiculous for someone to think they know well enough to tell me something that cosmically huge, and put it in a movie for me to just be like, wow, you're right. I think the ambiguity of this implies that Tom has to decide for himself what his lesson is. Because as you said, like, he takes initiative with her. He says, or he asks her questions. They're flirting a little bit, going back and forth as their competition for the job at the architecture firm. There's already a much more natural chemistry between the two of them than he ever had with Summer. She says something really important when she's like, yeah, I've seen you around at Angelus Plaza. And he's like, really? I've never seen you. And she's like, must not have been looking. I think that signals that he was so obsessed with his own sadness and self-absorbed that he wasn't looking around at life. He wasn't letting life happen. And maybe he would have noticed her before. Maybe the spark would have been there too. But for them to have to have been in the same place all those times and now run into each other here in this way, and her name is Autumn, to me, him looking at the camera is him being like, okay, let's see how this is going to test me and what I think I've learned. Because we've already seen that he's learned to take initiative because he goes back and asks her for coffee. He takes the rejection respectfully at first when she says she's busy, but she clearly really wanted to, so she's like, okay, I'll blow those plans off. I really want to see this guy. He takes it all in stride and he goes with it. So he's learned to be more easygoing and more assertive at the same time. Two things he really needed to be. And it's happening when he wasn't even looking for it. And that, to me, is always the biggest thing about finding love and finding romance, is that it happens when you least expect it. Because I was always the type to be like, oh, if I go out to a party or something, maybe I'll meet the one tonight. And, like, you're just setting yourself up for failure and setting up too many expectations that way. The one time he wasn't thinking of it at all is when it finally happens. And we don't know for sure that this is going to work out, that this relationship will last, that it'll even be a relationship. But what would the alternative be? Would he just never date again? Would he never try with somebody else? Would he never, or would he think that because fate isn't real, that love isn't worth looking for? So ultimately, I think we've seen a lot of the ways in which he's grown. And since he's been stubborn in the past, and we all often are, the lesson, the wider, I like worldview that he might have of whether or not fate is real. Maybe it's not going to set in yet, and maybe he just needs to see how this new relationship goes first before he can come to any new decisions. And maybe he will experience the same kind of mutual connection and assuredness with Autumn that Summer found with her husband. So, yeah, in the end, I think he learned something. I think it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's a little too on the nose that, of course, her name is Autumn, but, like, really, what else could it be? You know?
Yeah, it works.
You know, these relationships are like seasons of life. They take over time periods, and who you are changes throughout them. You grow, or you learn, or sometimes you get worse. What will this new season bring him? So whether or not he learns anything is kind of ambiguous. I think it's clear that he does, but it's also signifying that there's more to learn. You know, that he's going on the next however many days of a new season that will teach him new things, and hopefully this time it'll work.
You're selling me a little bit on it. I think what bothers me, or what's holding me back from being fully on board with you, is that the season changes only when he meets a new person. It really bothers me because it tells me that he just can't be by himself.
That's a good point.
And that really frustrates me because everything you said is beautiful, and I agree with it. Like, on a human, universal, outside of 500 Days of Summer level. Mm-hmm. That is stuff that I would say to friends that are struggling.
Yeah.
And it's stuff that I wish I had told myself when I was younger, too. Yeah. From a story movie point of view, it irks me.
Yeah.
Because it's just, like you said, it's too on the nose with her name, and it's like tying a bow way too sharply. Mm-hmm. And the ticker immediately starts again.
Yeah.
And so this is now day one of Autumn, because summer is over, because now he has a new person to obsess about, which, yes, granted, he might not obsess about her because he's been different with her already. Yeah. I understand what you're saying. I agree with it. I see how he's changed in those behavioral ways with other women. Man, I wish his name was like Tom Winter or something, so that it could be like day one of winter. Yeah. Because then I would agree with you. Like, if the ticker changed and it became about him fully, and she was a part of his now fulfilling life because he's learned how to interact with others in a genuine way. Yeah. And be interested and care and all those things. I'm with you. Because
that's a good point, because it does immediately change from 500 to 1.
Yeah.
So for the last 12 days after he had that moment of closure with Summer that not all of us get, by the way, that was a very beautiful moment of closure that you should be very grateful for if you ever get it in a relationship, or at the end of one. It is a good question. What was going on in those last 12 days? Was he over it with that talk with her, or was it like maybe fading out? Maybe
that's what I have to assume.
Maybe he didn't realize he was fully over her until he was actually had his interest sparked by someone again. I know from my own personal experience, that's not quite how it worked for me, because I had dated people while I was not over somebody, and then eventually that would just come to a head. I would realize that I was not over the last person, and that I would never be able to fully give myself over to someone before I got over that and I had done the work for myself. When I met my current partner that I've been with for 4 years now, that didn't happen. I had realized not long before that I was over the last one, that I had actually moved on and gotten to a better place. It took a long time, a lot longer than I wanted it to, but I sat with it long enough to be able to recognize it and recognize when I was ready. And because I was ready, I was able to open up to her right away and receive her and meet her at this moment, you know? You could debate whether or not it's chemistry or fate or whatever that makes it work with her that it didn't work with anyone else. But ultimately I had to let go of the past and take the lessons from it without holding on to all that pain. Tom, I don't know. What does it really mean to still be in 12 more days of summer? Is it just where he thinks he is? Or does the switch from 500 to 1 in the same day signify that he's over it and he didn't even know? I don't know.
I think you mentioned ambiguity, and you're asking all these very valid questions that would help us get the movie better. I think the ambiguity works in the movie to its benefit sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works to its detriment.
Yes.
And for me, this ending that's played for cutesiness, it's too ambiguous for me as a more mature moviegoer looking for more and like really trying to engage positively with the story. I think it needed a little more clarity. I think if we had a day 495 of Tom where he's sitting there and he's drawing, but he's not drinking, he's not eating Twinkies.
Yeah.
Maybe he's like actively applying for jobs, he's getting his portfolio together. I think that you could sell me on an implication there that he's over her.
We do get that when he's done with the Twinkie thing and he was bouncing the tennis ball and then he starts doing it rhythmically to the Wolf Mother song. And
but we get that. We get that before he gets closure from Summer.
Right.
What I'm saying is I would have appreciated a scene like that after the closure.
Yeah.
Because if we get the closure on their relationship on the bench on 488.
Yeah. You know what would have been cool? Is if we had a bunch of little days shown where like he's out with his friends and like the text of the numbers is fading.
Yeah, there you go.
So then it still hits 500, but it's not as prevalent. That
give us a montage with another indie song. Come on, why not?
Yeah, why not? They can't be that expensive. Okay, so that's a good point that the ambiguity does kind of hinder it there. Yeah, I think
that would fix the movie for me in the ways that I struggle and wrestle with it, which ultimately for me end up being on the negative side of things. If there was a little more clarity in that interim after they have the conversation.
Yeah.
And it still ended the same exact way with him meeting Autumn, then I would buy it. Then I would be like, okay, you know what? He deserves Autumn because he has weathered Summer, both as a person in the relationship and to whatever detriments and whatever things he's grown through, but also like just the season of his relationship with her. He has finished that season of his life, like you said, so that now he can move on to Autumn, both the season and the person, you know?
Yeah.
But without having just that little bit of clarity, what they give us is not enough for me to fully go on board with all of the lovely things that you said. Because, again, I agree with you. It's not enough. They're not giving us enough on the screen, and they leave a little too much open to implication and heavy lifting interpretation on the audience's part.
Got it. No, that is a good point. Yeah.
Any final thoughts? on 500 Days of Summer?
You know, this is probably my final thought. This is an earlier girlfriend note from my partner. She said, Steve, do you like this movie so much because it got you thinking about movies differently at a time when you were looking to form your own style of filmmaking? And I was just like, unquestionably so. Like this will always have a nostalgic place in my heart because of that. And because it has continued to be kind of I kind of put it on in the same place in my heart as like It's a Wonderful Life, a movie that changes with you. You know, the older you get, the more you relate to George Bailey. You know, any feelings you may have of like unfulfilled dreams and wondering what your life is worth and you know, wondering if the world would be better without you and stuff. Uh, and then being able to reflect on the ways that everybody touches everybody and to have pride and love for yourself and your life and what you've built, even if it's not what you wanted. That's one of my favorite movies, and I think 500 Days has been that same kind of thing for me in that it hit when I was Tom and obsessed with a summer. It hit when I thought I found my autumn, and it hit when I didn't need to think about love like that anymore at all. Because I was just like, okay, I could just remember that time. I can marvel at it and take stock in the growth that I've had as a person, both because of this movie and because of being able to look back and say, like, I've moved past it. You know, this is not something I need to watch regularly anymore. My taste has changed in art and movies. So there's things about this that don't hold up to me as much anymore, but I can always appreciate it for what it was to me at the point that it was, and still just appreciate a lot of the craft and humor and like nuggets of wisdom or hints or about the story or anything like that. There's a lot that I can still appreciate about it. Doesn't mean the same that it used to, but it'll always be special to me.
Nice. I don't know. Would you watch this movie again?
Would I watch it again?
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a few years from now, because the busier and older I get, the more time is precious that I want to like experience new things, and I don't want to keep rewatching stuff. And I'm not screenwriting anymore, so I'm not like trying to go back to my Hallmark movies of what kind of style I'm trying to emulate. So I wouldn't need to study it as much. So I wouldn't get the same stuff out of rewatching it anymore that I used to.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, but it's not a priority.
That's fair. I don't think I'll ever rewatch this movie again.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I ever have a child, probably mostly a boy,
mm-hmm.
I'd watch this with them.
Yes.
Kind of as like a low-key take a lesson from this son sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that'd probably be in their late teenage college years.
Yeah.
But I think I've squeezed all the enjoyment I can get out of this film. Not in a bad way, because I especially appreciated it I especially appreciated and enjoyed it watching it this time, both with my partner and to be able to engage with it with you about it, just because we had such different views and we had such different takeaways. I don't know what someone else could say about this movie to make me want to go back.
Yeah.
And watch it again. Like,
do you know how many times you've seen it?
This is at least the third time.
Oh, okay.
And which maybe is not a lot for some people, but for me, and again, I'm saying at least, it's probably been more, because when I was younger, I really did love this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't love it anymore.
Yeah.
And it perturbs me, and it rubs me the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And for all the reasons stated before, but there's an appreciation for it on a craft level, like you said, but I'd rather engage with something new at this point. I was telling my partner that I wanted Summer's point of view, that I would love to watch a movie. Like, I would rewatch this if they did a 500 Days of Summer or 500 Days of Autumn,
Yeah.
which I doubt they'll ever do, because they shouldn't. They should just let things be. But if they were to ever do that, I'd rewatch it. My partner said, you should write a 500 Days of Summer. And I told her that I don't want to do that. I don't. It's essentially it's fan fiction, which I'm not interested in creating. But also I want to know the point of view of the filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
In the way that you said earlier, you don't want there to be this didactic answer from them. Yeah. I want them to tell me, what do you think? What were you going for? What were the ambiguous parts of the movie? I want you to answer them and where you were coming from, which I think is some of what the screenwriter kind of did answer by having a scene of Summer the morning after being bored and then cutting it to keep it in Tom's point of view. I appreciate our conversation much more than I do the movie on its own.
Okay.
So I think I'll go back and listen to this. Like, I would much rather hear your thoughts again and engage with it in that way. But I'd rather be challenged in a different way, just because I think you and I gave it a fair shake, you know? Yeah. Good movie, but I don't know how much better it will age from here on out either.
Well, depending how things go with the definition of what men and women are as recognized by the government, maybe that line will unfortunately age better.
Hopefully not. I hope it in that case. I hope it continues to age like
line
milk.
ages like milk.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I agree.
I would rather this movie be dated.
Yeah.
Because it means that we're growing like Tom does, because the whole point is growing. So
right.
Anyway,
so that brings us to the end of 500 Days of Summer, where we also have a new segment to close out our episodes going forward. It's going to be our recommendation corner of things for either of us to check out, listeners to check out. For me, I've been really getting into outsider art. I don't know why. It's been a thing. That's a reference to like Daniel Johnston, Tiny Tim, the musician for SpongeBob. I watched the Daniel Johnston story on YouTube last year, and it was just a very moving documentary and profile of him as a musician. I can't engage with his music, but I will not call it bad.
Okay.
And I'm not telling you to go listen to Daniel Johnston. Like, that's not what I would say. I don't think I would say that to anyone, but I could say to anyone to go watch his movie that's about him, just because I think there is something to say about engaging with art in all kinds of facets. And as I make more on my own and in bands and with musicians and with different groups of people that I interact with, if something doesn't click with an audience, that doesn't mean it's not good. It just means it's left of what's popular, which the older I get, the less I care about.
Yeah.
So 2 movies that kind of, I think, fall in that outsider art realm are Don't Let the River Beast Get You on Tubi, which is a pastiche of 50s movies. This guy, Matt Farley, makes these kind of awful movies with his friends, and they look like they were made for YouTube in the way that we have like made for TV movies. This feels made for YouTube. And it's funny. It's endlessly quotable. It's heartwarming, it's wholesome, and it's just really stupid. And I had a great time watching it. It's on Tubi, so it's free. So I would definitely check it out if you're into horror comedies, that kind of thing. Joel Haver made 12 movies in 12 months for 2024,
Whoa.
which is really, really cool. And whatever you think about the quality of the movies, I think it's really cool that he's just making stuff, which is something I'm trying to do more and more of. So the first movie I watched from him is called The Diarrhea Brothers Save the Day.
Yeah. I want to know what that is.
Yeah. It's about a family called Diarrhea. Their last name is Diarrhea. And they run a diarrhea company where they deliver diarrhea to people because they order it. This makes sense in the context of the movie.
Okay.
It is not disgusting in any way, shape, or form because he never sinks so low as to make it gross. I'm pretty sure you never see diarrhea in the movie to that extent.
I hope
but
not.
Right. But
that also makes
I'm
it
watching
funnier.
Right, exactly. But I'm watching it and I'm waiting for that low-hanging fruit to drop, and it never did, which I really appreciated. Even though he did stick to a lot of diarrhea jokes, which was great, but that's kind of the point. I've been getting into his YouTube videos about film and creating, and his methodology is just interesting because most of his movies are improvised, and he just like riffs with his friends, and they get from scene to scene, and that makes the story, which I think is cool. And so the Diarrhea Brothers Saves the Day. It was just a fun, stupid movie about a fake family whose company is folding. That's all I really want to say about it in any other way, shape, or form. It's on YouTube. It's free. So that's another one to go check out. It reminded me of Adam Sandler movies in the 90s where the humor was dumb, but I had a fun time with the dumb humor.
Okay.
My other recommendation for the week is Challenger Deep, which is a novel by Neil Shusterman. It's one of the books I assigned for my incoming 10th graders every September. And it's about a boy who is diagnosed with psychosis and schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it is the most inclusive way to talk about mental health issues is to see it firsthand from someone who doesn't realize that they're going through it and aren't equipped to handle it, but they navigate it to the best of their abilities. And it also just normalizes schizophrenia and mental illness in general. I think in a very beautiful way. I'm not done with it yet. I think there's some pacing issues, but I mean, the message beats out the content on this one for me. And I just think it's a beautiful book that people can knock out in probably like a day or two and feel like they grew or learned from it.
I'm going to check that out. That sounds good.
What are yours?
So my recommendations, I briefly talked about one of them in our first episode. It's the anime Kaguya-sama Love is War.
Yeah.
This show is hilarious and heartfelt. It's an anime about the president and vice president of a student council. They are both super geniuses and very calculating people that are in love with each other, but want the other to admit it first. So they go through psychological warfare with each other to get the other to admit it because they're both too proud to say it first. And it starts with just them and their clueless treasurer, Fujiwara. That's like a great just agent of chaos to throw in there. And then more and more characters build out the cast until it becomes like just one of the sweetest, most heartfelt and hilarious and well-written shows ever. I don't know if it's getting a fourth season. I don't think it is, but the 3 seasons that are out are perfect, and you'll fly through it. And my other recommendation very much in line with 500 Days of Summer, of similar time in my life, and is still probably my favorite movie ever, is Sing Street. Uh, Look, everyone who knows me knows that I am obsessed with this movie. I have talked about it and introduced it to dozens of people. It's basically a requirement of being friends with me is that you either watch it with me or see it on your own, and if you hadn't already. It's the third movie by John Carney, who also did Once, Begin Again, and then after this did the Modern Love show on Amazon Prime, based on the Modern Love New York Times stories. And he did another movie I can't remember the name of. Flora and Son, I think. That wasn't as good. But Sing Street, it's my favorite of his movies. It's about a kid in the 80s in high school who's trying to impress a girl he likes, so he starts a band. It's set in Dublin, and it is a very, very Irish movie. And it's just such a great love letter to not just youth and young romance, but like creativity and art and music, and the music from that time. Back when we were still in like the Stranger Things season 1 era of 80s nostalgia, so it hadn't like completely gotten overblown yet. It just says so much about, like, again, I'm noticing I love a lot of things that are nostalgic. It just reminds me of what it was like to be young and start a band with your friends and have dreams and possibilities and whatnot, and to, at the end, give everything to go after your dreams. Probably still my favorite movie. I think it's also one that I think I've outgrown a little bit at this point because I've seen it so many times, and it's been my favorite for so long. But it'll always have a special place in my heart, and I just have to recommend it. Like, and I wanted to get that recommendation out like first chance I had.
Yeah, no, that's
podcast.
fair. Yeah, I 100% co-sign Sing Street. I think between that and 500 Days of Summer, this easily wins my heart.
Yeah, that has a good through line too. But like, if you like one, you'll probably like the other, or things about it.
Yeah. It's another one that can go with it is That Thing You Do. If you're looking for something more musical and less romantic, it's a good little trilogy, I guess, to watch. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening to Filler, our 500 Days of Summer episode. We hope you grew more than Tom did at the end of the movie.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Happy Valentine's Day.